that it was that bad, or no?
Well, I knew that I threw a bad pitch, but I didn't realize till that moment how bad I looked throwing it, which are two different things.
Yeah.
Throwing a bad pitch, you can look good and throw a bad pitch. Like Adam Carolla threw a pitch over the catcher's head, but he looked good doing it. I threw a bad pitch and looked bad doing it. Like I looked so bad, even if it was a strike, it would have looked bad.
Right. Yeah. You could be, Ricky Vaughn in Major League and throw one off the backstop, but, the actual form, as you know, in manhood is quite important.
Exactly. Hey, Kevin, thanks a lot for being part of the audiobook.
Anytime, Gary. Appreciate it.
Greatly appreciate it. Take care.
Chapter 21. 6:54:30. The long walk back to Howard's office.
I'd be a liar if I told you that a week into my job with Howard, I could look ahead and see where I am today. When I started, I loved working for everyone in Howard's orbit. He and Robin and Fred were maestros in the studio, riffing perfectly and setting one another up for comedy gold. They'd only been together for a couple of years at this point, but they had the rhythm of well-trained sketch artists. I was just the interloper who had 30 days to prove himself. But I was determined to make myself valuable during that month. If it worked out, great. If not, maybe they'd still like me enough to recommend me for another job. The way the offices were set up, I sat on one side of the building near Fred and Howard. Robin was on the other side in the newsroom. Because of that, I didn't have as much interaction with her as I did with Howard and Fred. You could always hear her coming because she has that incredible laugh that filled the halls. But those first couple of years, she was the one who reminded me most of my mother. I didn't know how Robin was going to react to me day to day. I remember one afternoon I got to work and Fred met me at the front door. I hear Robin and Howard talking in Howard's office, he said. There's a lot of yelling and your name keeps coming up. When Howard called me in, it turned into a screaming match between Robin and me. I can't remember what we were fighting about. Finally, Howard said, I don't know what the fuck is going on, but figure it out. I was a kid in my early 20s, and what I cared about most was drinking and hooking up. After I read Robin's book, I realized she was actually doing a very good job of putting on a good face while dealing with a lot of personal shit. We get along great now, but sometimes I got on her nerves. Howard had created the kind of environment where everyone could be themselves and contribute to the show. He was so normal and funny and had such a good vibe, but he also had a very clear picture of what he wanted. He'd listen to all of our ideas, pick the best parts of each one, and then incorporate them. I was used to working for Roz, someone who didn't accept anyone's opinion except her own. In order to secure my place at the show, I had decided I should follow Fred around like a puppy. I spent more time watching him than anyone else because he clearly knew a lot about producing radio. Getting to see him work every day made me realize that he was a much more important element of the show than a listener might think. Plus, I could see that he needed a hand. For his part, Fred wanted to show me the ropes so I could free him up to do more writing and segment producing. He knew that was why Howard hired me, to take care of stuff around the office so the creative people could be as creative as possible. If Fred said, hey, we need 2 baked potatoes and 4 ounces of turkey with no salt, my attitude wasn't, are you kidding me? It was, I'll get it for you as fast as I can. I could see Fred was getting bogged down in the nuts and bolts stuff, and it was keeping him from being creative. I watched Fred write some bits, and Howard would voice them. Then Fred would do the background tracks for song parodies and harmonize with himself, layering one vocal on top of the other. Sometimes, if we required crowd noise, we needed to make our own. Fred would grab people as they were walking by or call people from their desks into the studio to get a good buzz going. If no one was around, he built the crowd himself, standing in different parts of the studio and at different distances from the microphone. He'd do a high voice and a low voice, then have the engineer lay one on top of the other, until like magic, you had a crowd of people where once there had just been a single guy behind a microphone. He was so technically sound, an unbelievable writer and producer. Not the kind of producing I do, but producing pieces, telling engineers how to make them. No matter how pressed he was for time, the show would be starting in a half hour and an engineer would decide that was when it was time to take a break. Fred would still calmly explain to me what was happening. After working on the show for just 3 weeks, I already felt an intense loyalty to it. The guys had really taken me in. All around me was this corporate environment. I was dealing with a station lawyer about half a dozen daily issues regarding the show, and I worked with music directors and the station general manager. But within the confines of the show, it was very loose and comfortable. The only goal was doing something interesting and unique and entertaining. How we got there or who came up with the idea was secondary. Everyone found a way to contribute, on the air and off. Once Howard decided we were going to do something that had never been done on radio before, convince a woman to get naked on the air. Just because none of our listeners could see what we were doing didn't mean we couldn't be titillating and push the envelope. He announced the contest, and we had 3 women call in who wanted to do it. It really didn't take much convincing. I took their numbers, called them back, and set up times for them to come the next day. Before the show that afternoon, Howard pulled me aside and said, "Listen, this isn't a circus, okay? I want you to put newspaper over the windows. Do not let anyone who doesn't need to be in the studio get inside the studio." "Absolutely," I said. We went on the air. The girls were inside, and it was crazy. The way Howard described them was brilliant. You didn't need to see them to get a clear picture of how good they looked. A steady stream of people, mostly the other young producers and assistants I had worked with for the past year, were coming up to the door trying to get into the studio, and I told all of them to turn around. That wasn't too hard. But then the lawyer I worked with every day came by. "I need to get in," he said. "I can't," I said. "Howard told me not to let anyone in." "I am the lawyer," he said, again calmly but more forcefully. "You need to let me in." "Why?" I asked. "Because," he said, "I am the lawyer, and I need to see if there's anything indecent happening in there." I don't know where I got the balls to say what I said next. "Well," I said, "you don't really need to see if something indecent is going on. You need to hear if something indecent is going on. And if you want, you could sit across the hall and listen on some headphones." He was pissed. He stared at me. And then he audibly grunted and turned on his heels to go listen to the show. Afterward, I told Howard what happened. He told me I did the right thing, but 2 other things happened because of it. 1, he saw that I had his back. 2, I saw that he had my back for having his back. There were no repercussions for what I did, and I realized from then on, any dispute between Howard and management, I was always going to side with Howard. If I were going to put my eggs in one basket, without a doubt, they were going to be in his. Even after that incident, though, I still wasn't sure if I had a full-time job. I'd been working on the show for nearly a month, and I was literally counting the days until those 4 weeks were up. I figured Howard and Fred were too, and then we would have a conversation about how I was doing, what I needed to do to get better, and whether I had a long-term future at the show. The show ended at 6:54:30 on the dot at the end of every day, and I would grab the drum and the cymbal and walk back to Howard's office with him. We'd do some small talk about the show, but at the 1-month mark I was too anxious. I just blurted out, "So what's the story?" "About what?" he said, kind of confused. "About me," I said. "You guys told me I was being hired on a temporary basis for a month. Well, it's been a month. Am I hired?" He just looked at me like I was an idiot. "What are you talking about? You got the job."
Chapter 22. Things were better when they were bad.
In 1996, after 3 kids and 45 years of marriage, my parents should have been getting a place in Florida and settling into their twilight years. Instead, they got divorced. All those